My name is Oriana Kelly, and for the past 8 months, I've been planning the perfect surprise. Not just any surprise, the kind that takes your breath away and makes you believe in love all over again. My parents' 30th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I wanted to recreate their original 1995 wedding day down to the last detail. I'm a wedding planner by profession, so when I set out to do something special, I don't mess around. I'd spent countless hours tracking down their original photographer's negatives, hunting for the exact shade of blush peonies my mother carried, and even finding a baker who could recreate their 3-tier vanilla cake with buttercream roses. The venue I'd booked was a lakeside resort 2 hours outside the city, the same style of location where they'd honeymooned 30 years ago. Every spare dollar from my savings account had gone into this project. $45,000, to be exact. But seeing my parents' faces when they walked into their dream celebration would be worth every penny. Or so I thought. I was sitting in my home office on a Thursday evening, surrounded by vendor contracts, timeline spreadsheets, and inspiration boards that looked like something out of a bridal magazine. The guest list was finalized, 150 people, including college friends my mother hadn't seen in years and my father's old army buddies. The invitations were at the printer, elegant cream cardstock with gold foil lettering that read "Celebrating 30 years of love and laughter." My phone buzzed with a text from Devon, my best friend and fellow wedding planner. "How are the anniversary plans coming? Your parents are going to lose their minds when they see what you've created." I smiled, typing back, almost ready to surprise them with the invitations. Can't wait to see their faces. What I couldn't wait to see was my mother's expression when she realized I'd managed to book the Riverside Manor, the same venue where her sorority sister had gotten married back in college, the one she'd always said was too fancy for regular people like us. I wanted to show her that her daughter could make dreams come true. The next morning, I carefully placed the invitation mock-ups in an elegant presentation folder and drove to my parents' house. My heart was racing with excitement as I pulled into their driveway. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for 8 months. But as I walked up to the front door, I could hear voices inside. Raised voices. My mother's distinctive laugh-cry combination that only happened when she was comforting someone. My stomach tightened with concern as I knocked. "Come in, honey," my father called out, his voice sounding strained. I pushed open the door to find my parents sitting on either side of my sister Scarlett on their old floral couch. Scarlett's perfectly contoured makeup was streaked with tears, and she was clutching a handful of tissues like her life depended on it. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting my presentation folder on the coffee table. "Scarlett, are you okay?" My mother looked up at me with that expression she always wore when she was about to ask me to fix something. "Oh, Oriana. Perfect timing. We need to talk about something important." I perched on the edge of the armchair across from them, my excitement about the surprise rapidly morphing into dread. "What's going on?" Scarlett let out a dramatic sob. "Trevor broke up with me," she wailed, referring to her on-again, off-again boyfriend of 3 years. "He said I was too focused on my social media and not enough on real life. Can you believe that? My Instagram is my career." I wanted to point out that having 3,000 followers and making maybe $50 a month from sponsored posts didn't exactly qualify as a career, but Scarlett was genuinely upset, so I kept my mouth shut. "I'm so sorry, Scar," I said instead. "That's really tough." My mother reached over and smoothed Scarlett's hair. "She's just devastated, aren't you, sweetheart? She needs something positive to focus on." "Which brings us to what we wanted to discuss," my father said, still avoiding direct eye contact with me. "About the anniversary celebration you mentioned planning." My heart started beating faster. "What about it?" "Well," my mother began, her voice taking on that overly cheerful tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news, "we were thinking it might be good for Scarlett to take charge of planning something special for us. You know, give her a creative project to channel her energy into during this difficult time." The words hit me like a physical blow. Take charge of planning it. Scarlett sniffled and looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I've always been good at party planning, and I could really use the distraction. Plus, my followers would love seeing behind-the-scenes content of putting together such a meaningful event." I stared at them, trying to process what was happening. But I've already been planning your anniversary celebration. For months. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, honey, you're so busy with work. We didn't want to add to your stress. Besides, Scarlett has been looking for ways to build her brand, and this could be perfect for her portfolio. My portfolio? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Mom, I'm a wedding planner. This is literally what I do for a living. Yes, but you do it for strangers, Scarlett said, her tears mysteriously drying up. This is family. It's different. It's more personal. More personal. I thought about the 8 months I'd spent tracking down their original wedding vendors, the hours I'd spent on the phone with florists trying to source peonies in February, the deposit I'd put down on a string quartet because my mother had mentioned once, years ago, that she wished she'd had live music at her wedding. What exactly are you thinking? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Well, my mother said, brightening, we thought we could keep the same date you suggested. June 15th is perfect. And Scarlett has some wonderful ideas about venues. I was thinking something more modern, Scarlett chimed in, her Instagram influencer voice fully activated. Like that new rooftop place downtown with the infinity pool. Very aesthetic. My photographer friend Marcus could do the shoot. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Your photographer friend Marcus who takes pictures of you in bikinis for your Instagram. He's very talented, Scarlett said defensively. And he owes me a favor. My father finally spoke up. The important thing is that it comes from the heart, right? It doesn't matter who plans it as long as we're all together celebrating. All together. Except apparently, I wasn't part of the all who would be doing the actual celebrating. I was just expected to step aside and let my unemployed sister take credit for an event she couldn't afford to throw in a million years. So, I said slowly, you want me to cancel whatever plans I might have had and let Scarlett take over? Don't be dramatic, Oriana, my mother said with a laugh. It's not like you'd put that much work into it yet. How much planning could you have done without even talking to us about it? I looked down at the presentation folder on the coffee table, filled with contracts, vendor agreements, timeline spreadsheets, and invitation mock-ups. 8 months of work. $45,000 of my savings. My entire vision for giving them the wedding anniversary of their dreams. You know what? I said, standing up and grabbing my folder. You're absolutely right. Scarlett should plan your anniversary celebration. Relief flooded my mother's face. Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd understand. Scarlett beamed at me. Thanks, Ari. I promise I'll make it amazing. Maybe you could help me with some of the vendor connections. You know, as my assistant. Her assistant. After 8 months of work, $45,000, and countless hours of my professional expertise, I was being offered the role of assistant to someone who thought a rooftop pool party was appropriate for a 30th wedding anniversary celebration. Sure, I said, forcing a smile. I'd be happy to help. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, replaying every word of that conversation. The casual dismissal of my work. The assumption that I hadn't put that much into it yet. Scarlett's smug satisfaction at being handed something I'd created. By the time I got home, the shock was wearing off and rage was setting in. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes, just breathing and trying to process what had happened. Then I marched upstairs to my apartment, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every single vendor account I'd used for their anniversary planning. The Riverside Manor reservation. Cancelled. The string quartet I'd booked for their first dance. Cancelled. The florist who'd promised to source Belgian peonies. Cancelled. The photographer who'd agreed to recreate their 1995 wedding photos. Cancelled. The caterer who'd spent weeks perfecting a menu based on their favorite dishes. Cancelled. With each cancellation, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and devastation. These weren't just reservations. They were pieces of a dream I'd been building for 8 months. But if my family couldn't appreciate the work I'd put in, If they thought so little of my efforts that they could hand them over to Scarlett like a party planning consolation prize, then they didn't deserve to benefit from them. The hardest cancellation was the cake. I'd spent hours with the baker, looking at photos of my parents' original wedding cake and discussing flavor profiles. She'd been so excited about the project, calling it a romantic challenge. When I called to cancel, she was genuinely disappointed. "Are you sure, Ms. Kelly? We've been looking forward to this project for months. It's not often we get to recreate such a meaningful piece of history." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. Plans changed. By the time I closed my laptop, I'd cancelled over 40 vendors and retrieved deposits totaling nearly $30,000. The remaining $15,000 had been non-refundable deposits, but honestly, it felt like a small price to pay for my dignity. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, staring at my phone. Part of me wondered if I should call them back, try to explain what I'd done and why. But the larger part of me, the part that was tired of being taken for granted, wanted to wait and see how long it would take them to figure it out. I didn't have to wait long. My phone started ringing at 8:47 p.m. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. Finally, I picked up. "Oriana." My mother's voice was sharp with panic. "What did you do?" "The venue called Scarlett and said there's no reservation under our name for June 15th. "That's strange," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Maybe she should call around to other venues. I'm sure she'll find something." "Don't play games with me," my mother snapped. "Did you cancel the reservation?" "What reservation?" I asked innocently. "I thought you said I hadn't put much work into planning anything yet." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Oriana Kelly, what have you done?" "I took your advice," I said calmly. "I stepped aside so Scarlett could plan your anniversary celebration from scratch. After all, it should come from the heart, right? And since I apparently hadn't done much planning yet, there wasn't much for her to take over." "But the vendors." "What vendors?" I interrupted. "According to you, I hadn't started planning anything substantial yet. So there shouldn't be any vendors to worry about." I could hear muffled conversation in the background, my mother talking frantically to someone, probably my father and Scarlett. "Oriana," my mother's voice came back on the line, now with a forced calm that I recognized as her trying not to lose it tone. "Let's talk about this rationally. If you had already started making arrangements, we can work with that." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "You made your choice. You decided that Scarlett needed this more than I did. You decided that my 8 months of work, my professional expertise, and my financial investment were less important than giving your other daughter a creative project. So now she gets to figure it out herself." 8 months. My mother's voice cracked. "You've been planning this for 8 months." "Since last October," I confirmed. "I had everything arranged. The perfect venue, the exact flowers from your original wedding, a string quartet, a photographer who specializes in anniversary celebrations. I even found someone who could recreate your 1995 wedding cake recipe. But according to you, that wasn't much work, so Scarlett should be able to replicate it easily." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Oriana." My father's voice came on the line. He must have taken the phone from my mother. "We had no idea you'd already put so much into this." "Because you didn't ask," I replied. "You just assumed that because I'm always the one who handles things, I wouldn't mind being pushed aside for Scarlett's emotional recovery project." "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I interrupted, "is spending 8 months and $45,000 of my own money to create something beautiful for you, only to be told it's not that important and someone else should take over. What's not fair is being offered the position of assistant to my own project." $45,000. My father's voice was barely a whisper. "Every penny of my savings," I confirmed. "But don't worry about it. Most of it was refundable. The rest I'm considering payment for a very expensive lesson about family priorities." I hung up before either of them could respond and turned off my phone. The silence in my apartment was overwhelming, But it wasn't the kind of silence that feels empty. It was the silence that comes after you've finally said everything you needed to say, after you've finally stood up for yourself in a way that matters. I spent the rest of the evening going through the printed materials I'd created for their anniversary. The timeline I'd spent weeks perfecting. The vendor contact sheets. The menu cards with their names embossed in gold. The seating chart that took into account 30 years of family dynamics and social relationships. Looking at it all spread out on my dining room table, I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. This had been beautiful work, some of the best planning I'd ever done. But it had been created for people who couldn't see its value, who were willing to toss it aside the moment something else became more convenient. I gathered all the papers and put them in a box. Not to throw away, the work was too good for that, but to store. Maybe someday I'd use these ideas for clients who would actually appreciate them. The next morning, I kept my phone turned off and went to work as usual. My assistant, Devon, took one look at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "Okay, what happened?" she demanded, following me into my office with 2 cups of coffee. "And don't tell me nothing. You look like someone killed your cat." I sat down at my desk and told her the whole story. Devon listened without interrupting, her expression growing more outraged with each detail. "They did what?" she exploded when I finished. "After 8 months of work. After you spent your entire savings account." Apparently Scarlett needed a creative project more than I needed recognition for my own work, I said bitterly. "Please tell me you didn't just hand everything over to her." I gave her a look. "Oh my God," Devon said, her eyes widening. "You cancelled everything, didn't you? Every last vendor." "Oriana." Devon jumped up and hugged me. "I'm so proud of you. It's about time you stood up to them." "I turned my phone off last night," I admitted. "I'm afraid to turn it back on." "Don't you dare feel guilty about this," Devon said firmly. "They made their choice. Now they get to live with the consequences." Around noon, curiosity got the better of me and I turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 6 voicemails. The texts started pleading and escalated to angry. "Mom, please call us back. We need to talk about this." "Mom, Oriana, this is important. Your father and I want to work this out." "Scarlett, are you seriously going to ruin Mom and Dad's anniversary over this?" "Mom, we're coming over to talk to you." "Scarlett, this is so petty, even for you." "Dad, your mother is very upset. Please call." "Scarlett, I can't believe you're being this selfish." The voicemails were more of the same, my mother crying, my father trying to be reasonable, and Scarlett alternating between guilt trips and accusations. But it was the last voicemail that really got to me. It was from my mother, and her voice was small and broken. "Oriana, sweetheart, I think I understand now why you're so upset. We didn't realize. We should have asked. Please call us back. We love you, and we don't want to lose you over this. Your anniversary planning meant the world to us, and we're so sorry we didn't see that before." I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar tug of guilt that had controlled so much of my life. This was the moment where I usually caved, where I fixed whatever mess had been created and pretended everything was fine. But not this time. I deleted all the messages and voicemails without responding and went back to work. That evening, I was at home making dinner when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I could see all 3 of them standing in the hallway. My parents and Scarlett, looking like a delegation sent to negotiate my surrender. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "We need to talk," my mother said, her eyes red from crying. "Do we?" I asked, not moving aside to let them in. "Oriana, please," my father said quietly. "Let us explain." Against my better judgment, I stepped back and let them into my apartment. They filed in and sat on my couch like they were attending a funeral, which, in a way, I suppose they were. "We didn't know," my mother began immediately. "About the planning, about the money, about how much work you'd already put in. We thought." "You thought I was incompetent," I said, cutting her off. "You thought that because I hadn't mentioned it, I hadn't actually done anything substantive." That's not true. Yes, it is, I said firmly. You've always assumed that whatever I do isn't as important as whatever crisis Scarlett is going through. You've spent 30 years making me the responsible one, the one who handles things, the one who makes sure everyone else is taken care of. But the moment there's a choice between my work and Scarlett's feelings, you choose her. Scarlett shifted uncomfortably. That's not. I mean, I didn't know you'd already. You didn't care, I said, looking directly at her. You saw an opportunity to take over something that would benefit you, and you took it. Just like you always do. I was hurting. Scarlett protested. Trevor broke up with me. I needed something to focus on. And I needed my family to respect the work I'd put into something I created for them. I shot back. But apparently your temporary sadness over a guy who's broken up with you 12 times in 3 years was more important than that. My father cleared his throat. Oriana, we understand why you're upset. Do you? I interrupted. Do you understand that I spent 8 months of my life creating something beautiful for you? Do you understand that I researched every detail of your original wedding so I could recreate the magic of that day? Do you understand that I invested $45,000 of my own money because I wanted to give you something unforgettable? The room fell silent. Even Scarlett, who always had something to say, was staring at the floor. I found the photographer who took your engagement photos, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. I tracked down the florist who did your original bouquet. She's retired now, but she was going to come out of retirement just for this project because she remembered how happy you were. I booked the string quartet that plays at the symphony because you mentioned once that you wished you'd had live music at your wedding. My mother's face was crumpling, but I wasn't done. I planned a menu based on all your favorite dishes from the restaurants where you had your first dates. I found a baker who was willing to recreate your wedding cake recipe from a 30-year-old photo. I invited people you hadn't seen in decades because I thought you'd want to share this milestone with everyone who mattered to you. Oriana. My mother whispered. I thought about every single detail because I wanted this to be perfect for you, I said, my voice breaking slightly. And you handed it over to someone who wanted to turn it into a rooftop pool party for her Instagram content. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Scarlett spoke up, her voice smaller than usual. I didn't know about any of that. Because you didn't ask, I said simply. None of you asked. You just assumed that because I'm always the one who handles things, I wouldn't mind being pushed aside. We were wrong, my father said quietly. We were so wrong, and we're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I replied. Sorry doesn't undo the damage to my professional relationships when I had to cancel 40 vendors with less than 3 months' notice. Sorry doesn't restore the trust I've lost with suppliers who went out of their way to accommodate this project. What can we do? My mother asked desperately. How can we fix this? I looked at the 3 of them sitting on my couch, and for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. My mother, who had spent 30 years making excuses for my sister's irresponsibility. My father, who avoided conflict by going along with whatever kept the peace. And Scarlett, who had never learned to appreciate anything because everything had always been handed to her. You can't fix this, I said finally. This isn't something you can smooth over with apologies and promises to do better. This is about respect, and you've shown me exactly how much respect you have for my work and my feelings. That's not true, my mother protested. We love you. Love isn't enough, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Love without respect is just manipulation with better intentions. I walked to my front door and opened it. I think you should leave now, I said. Scarlett has an anniversary celebration to plan, and I have my own life to focus on. They filed out slowly, my mother crying quietly, my father looking defeated, and Scarlett still seeming confused about how everything had gone so wrong for her. As I closed the door behind them, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete control over my own life. The next few weeks were surprisingly peaceful. I threw myself into work, helping other families celebrate their milestones and create memories that would last a lifetime. My clients appreciated my attention to detail, my creative vision, and my ability to bring their dreams to life. It reminded me why I'd become a wedding planner in the first place, not to serve as an unpaid family coordinator, but to create magic for people who valued what I could do. Devon kept me updated on the family drama through her connections in the local vendor network. Apparently, Scarlett had tried to book several venues, only to discover that quality locations require deposits and contracts months in advance. She'd also learned that photographer friend Marcus charged real money for professional services, and that her budget of whatever mom and dad can afford wasn't going to cover the kind of celebration she'd envisioned. Word is they're looking at the community center and asking people to bring potluck dishes, Devon reported during one of our coffee breaks. Scarlett posted a sob story on Instagram about family betrayal and toxic relatives, but even her followers are asking why she didn't just plan her own event from the beginning. I felt a small stab of satisfaction, followed immediately by guilt. These were my parents, after all. Did I really want their 30th anniversary to be a disaster? But then I remembered my mother's dismissive wave when she'd said, "How much planning could you have done?" And the guilt faded. A month before their anniversary, my father called me at work. "Oriana," he said, his voice tentative, "I hope you don't mind me calling." "What do you need, Dad?" "We wanted to invite you to the anniversary celebration. I know things have been difficult, but you're still our daughter, and we'd like you to be there." I leaned back in my office chair, looking out the window at the city skyline. "Where's it being held?" "The community center on 5th Street, he admitted. "Scarlett's done her best with the planning, but it's different from what you probably had in mind." "I'm sure it's exactly what she envisioned," I said diplomatically. "Oriana," my father's voice cracked slightly, "we miss you. Your mother cries every time she thinks about celebrating without you there." For a moment, I wavered. 30 years of conditioning told me to give in, to show up and pretend everything was fine, to be the bigger person and let bygones be bygones. But then I thought about the 8 months of work, the $45,000, the dismissive laughter when they'd handed my project over to someone else. "Dad," I said gently, "I hope you and Mom have a wonderful anniversary. But I won't be attending." "Please." "You made your choice about who you wanted planning your celebration and who you wanted involved in it," I said firmly. "Now you get to live with that choice. I hope Scarlett gives you exactly the kind of party you deserve." I hung up before he could argue further. The day of their anniversary, I treated myself to a spa day. I got a massage, had a facial, and spent the afternoon by the pool at an upscale resort about an hour outside the city. I posted a few photos on my own Instagram, something I rarely did, with the caption celebrating self-care and personal growth. That evening, while my parents were presumably eating potluck casseroles in a community center, I was having dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was spending more on one meal than they probably had on their entire celebration. My phone buzzed with notifications throughout the evening, but I didn't check them until I got home. There were photos from the anniversary party. My parents standing awkwardly in front of a folding table covered with a plastic tablecloth, my mother holding a grocery store bouquet, my father cutting what appeared to be a sheet cake from Costco. But it was Scarlett's Instagram post that really caught my attention. Instead of the glamorous content she'd promised, she'd posted a single photo of herself looking tired and overwhelmed, with the caption, "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the hardest experiences." Today I learned that planning meaningful celebrations requires more than good intentions. It requires expertise, dedication, and months of careful preparation. I have so much more respect now for people who do this professionally. #lessons learned, #family time, #grateful. I stared at that post for a long time. It was probably the most self-aware thing Scarlett had ever written, and certainly the first time she'd publicly acknowledged that she was in over her head with something. But it was too little, too late. Over the following months, my parents made several attempts to rebuild our relationship. They invited me to family dinners, sent thoughtful cards on holidays, and even offered to pay me to plan Scarlett's birthday party. But each gesture felt hollow, like they were checking boxes rather than addressing the fundamental issue of respect. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. I'd agreed to attend dinner, hoping that enough time had passed for us to move forward. But within an hour of arriving, I was being asked to mediate a dispute between Scarlett and our cousin about wedding planning, asked to fix the turkey that was cooking unevenly, and asked to handle the wine selection because I knew about these things. I set down my fork and looked around the table at my family. My mother looking at me expectantly, my father avoiding eye contact, and Scarlett absorbed in her phone, probably posting about our gratitude gathering for her followers. "I need to leave," I said quietly. "But we haven't had dessert yet," my mother protested. "I'm not hungry anymore," I replied, standing up and grabbing my purse. "Oriana, don't be dramatic," Scarlett said without looking up from her phone. "We're just asking for help with normal family stuff." I stopped at the door and turned back to face them. "Normal family stuff," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you expect me to fix your problems, plan your events, and manage your crises without any recognition or appreciation?" "We appreciate you," my mother said weakly. "No, you use me," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You appreciate what I can do for you, but you don't respect who I am or what my time is worth. And I'm done being your unpaid family coordinator." I left without saying goodbye and drove home to my quiet, peaceful apartment where no one expected me to fix anything or solve anyone's problems. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a business plan or a vendor contract, but a blog post titled "The Family Fixer: When Love Becomes Labor." I wrote about growing up as the responsible child, about the pressure to always be available for other people's emergencies, about the way professional skills can become family obligations without compensation or appreciation. I wrote about boundaries, about self-respect, and about the difference between helping people you love and enabling people who take advantage of you. I published it on my company blog, half expecting it to disappear into the internet void like most business content does. Instead, it went viral. Within a week, I had thousands of shares, hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of family exploitation, and dozens of interview requests from podcasters and bloggers who wanted to discuss the phenomenon of family fixers. More importantly, I started getting business inquiries from people who specifically wanted to work with someone who understood boundaries and professional respect. One email stood out from the rest. It was from Eleanor Morrison, a successful businesswoman in her 60s who wanted to hire me to plan her daughter's wedding. "I read your blog post," she wrote, "and I recognized something in your story that resonated deeply with me. I spent years being my family's problem solver until I learned that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. I'd like to work with someone who understands that distinction." Eleanor became not just a client, but a mentor. Over the months of planning her daughter's wedding, she shared stories of her own journey toward setting healthy boundaries with family members who had taken advantage of her generosity. "The people who truly love you," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed centerpiece options, "will never ask you to choose between your dignity and their happiness. Anyone who puts you in that position is showing you who they really are." Her daughter's wedding was everything my parents' anniversary could have been: elegant, meaningful, and created by people who valued and respected each other's contributions. When the bride hugged me at the reception and told me I'd made her dreams come true, I felt the satisfaction I'd been hoping to feel with my parents' celebration. 6 months after the anniversary disaster, I launched a new branch of my business, boundary setting for service professionals. I started speaking at conferences about professional boundaries, family dynamics, and the importance of being paid fairly for emotional labor. My calendar filled up with clients who had read my blog and wanted to work with someone who wouldn't let them take advantage of family relationships. The success felt good, but it wasn't until almost a year later that I realized how much my life had truly changed. I was planning a wedding for a young couple whose families were blending together in complicated ways. There were divorced parents, step-siblings, and all the drama that comes with trying to make everyone happy. In the past, I would have absorbed all that stress, would have made myself responsible for managing everyone's emotions and keeping the peace. Instead, I set clear boundaries from the beginning. I made it clear that my job was to plan their wedding, not to mediate their family relationships. I charged fairly for my services and didn't work for free just because someone cried about their budget. I treated their project with the professionalism it deserved, and they treated me with the respect I demanded. The wedding was beautiful, The families managed to coexist peacefully for one day, and I went home feeling proud of my work instead of emotionally drained from managing other people's dysfunction. That night, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not the temporary happiness that comes from fixing someone else's problem or earning someone else's approval, but the deep, sustainable happiness that comes from living authentically and putting yourself first. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful moment. For a second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be my family calling with another crisis for me to solve. But it was Devon, calling to congratulate me on the wedding and to share some gossip from the vendor network. "Oh, and I heard through the grapevine that your sister got engaged," she said casually. "Apparently she's back together with that Trevor guy, and they're planning a destination wedding in Mexico." "Good for her," I said, and I meant it. I genuinely hoped Scarlett had found happiness, even if she'd found it with someone who'd broken up with her a dozen times. "Your mom's been calling around, asking vendors if they know anyone who does destination wedding planning," Devon continued. "Word is she's looking for someone to help with the arrangements." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm sure she'll find someone." She specifically mentioned that she has a daughter who's a wedding planner, but that their relationship is complicated right now, Devon said. "I think she was fishing to see if anyone would recommend you." "What did people tell her?" "That if she wants to hire her daughter, she should call her daughter directly and be prepared to pay professional rates," Devon said with a chuckle. "The vendor community has gotten pretty protective of you since your blog went viral. Nobody wants to enable family dysfunction." I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. It meant something that my professional peers respected my boundaries enough to enforce them on my behalf. "Has she called you?" Devon asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I'm sure she will eventually." I was right. The call came 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing contracts for an upcoming corporate event. "Oriana," my mother's voice was carefully neutral, "I hope you don't mind me calling you at work." "What can I do for you, Mom?" "Well, I'm sure you've heard the news about Scarlett's engagement." "Congratulations to her," I said diplomatically. "Thank you. They're planning a destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas, and it's quite complicated to coordinate from here. I was wondering if you might be available for a consultation." There it was. The moment I'd been expecting for a year. "I'd be happy to discuss my destination wedding planning services with Scarlett," I said professionally. "She can call my office to set up an initial consultation. My assistant can email her my rates and contract terms." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your rates?" "Yes, Mom. I'm a professional wedding planner. I charge professional rates for my services." "But we're family." "Which is exactly why proper boundaries are so important," I replied calmly. "If Scarlett wants to hire me, she can do so through the same process as any other client." "Oriana, that seems so formal." "It is formal," I agreed. "Because this would be a professional relationship, not a family favor." Another pause. What if your father and I wanted to contribute to paying for your services? As our gift to Scarlett?" I had to admire the attempt at manipulation. Framing it as a gift to Scarlett while really trying to get me to work for free. "That's very generous of you," I said. "If Scarlett decides to hire me and you want to contribute to her wedding planning budget, that's between the two of you. My rates remain the same regardless of who's writing the check." "This is about the anniversary, isn't it?" my mother said, her voice getting emotional. "You're still punishing us." "No, Mom," I said gently. "This is about treating my profession with the respect it deserves. It's about recognizing that my time and expertise have value, whether the client is a stranger or my sister. We do respect your profession." "Then you'll understand why I need to run my business professionally," I interrupted. "Have Scarlett call my office if she's interested in my services." I hung up before the conversation could spiral into familiar territory. Scarlett never called. Instead, she hired a planning service in Cabo that specialized in destination weddings for Americans. Based on the photos she posted on Instagram, it was exactly the kind of beach party celebration she'd always dreamed of: colorful, casual, and very much her style. I was genuinely happy for her. Not because I'd been vindicated or proven right, but because she'd found professionals who could give her what she actually wanted, and she'd paid them appropriately for their work. A month after Scarlett's wedding, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Eleanor Morrison stopped by with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. "I have news," she announced, settling into the chair across from my desk. "My daughter Sarah is pregnant." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely thrilled. Sarah and her husband had been trying for over a year. "She wants to know if you do baby showers," Eleanor continued with a grin. "Apparently you're the only event planner she trusts to handle something this important." I laughed, touched by the compliment. I'd be honored to plan Sarah's baby shower. "Good," Eleanor said, popping the cork on the champagne. "Because I have a confession to make." She poured 2 glasses and handed one to me. "The real reason I hired you for Sarah's wedding wasn't just because I liked your blog," she said. "It was because I recognized something in your story that reminded me of my younger self." I raised an eyebrow, curious. 40 years ago, I was the family fixer too," Eleanor continued. "I planned every holiday, managed every crisis, smoothed over every conflict. I told myself it was because I loved them and wanted to help." "What changed?" I asked. Eleanor smiled sadly. "My brother's wedding. I spent 6 months and most of my savings planning what I thought would be the wedding of the century. Every detail was perfect, or it would have been, if they hadn't decided 2 weeks before the wedding that they wanted a completely different theme and asked me to just make it work without any additional budget." "What did you do?" "I made it work," Eleanor said with a bitter laugh. "I scrambled and stressed and nearly had a nervous breakdown, but I made it work. And you know what my brother said to me at the reception?" I shook my head. He said, "Thanks, Ellie. This is exactly what we envisioned from the beginning." Eleanor took a sip of champagne. As if the months of work I'd done originally had never happened. As if the panic and stress of completely redesigning everything at the last minute had been part of some master plan. That must have been devastating. "It was liberating," Eleanor said, surprising me. "Because that's when I realized that people will take as much as you're willing to give, and they'll always convince themselves they deserve it." She leaned forward in her chair. "The next family event that needed planning, I told them my rate. They laughed, thinking I was joking. When they realized I wasn't, they were offended. They found someone else to do it, and guess what? The event was fine. Not as good as what I would have done, but fine. And I learned that the world doesn't end when you stop fixing everyone else's problems." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Not for a second," Eleanor said firmly. "It took years for some family members to accept that I wasn't their personal event coordinator anymore. Some of them never did accept it. But the people who truly mattered found ways to show me they valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them." She raised her glass in a toast. "To boundary setters," she said. "To women who choose themselves. And to proving that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential." We clinked glasses, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because Eleanor understood my journey, but because her story proved that the path I'd chosen led somewhere meaningful. As we finished our champagne and started planning Sarah's baby shower, I reflected on how much my life had changed. 1.5 years ago, I'd been a chronic people-pleaser who measured my worth by how much I could do for others. Now I was a successful businesswoman who knew exactly what I was worth and wasn't afraid to demand it. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I was being too harsh or too stubborn. But every time I wavered, I remembered the casual dismissal of 8 months of work, the assumption that I hadn't put much effort into something that had consumed my life. That evening, as I was locking up my office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Oriana, this is Rachel Morrison, Eleanor's niece. I heard you're planning Sarah's baby shower, and I was wondering if you might be available to plan my wedding next fall. Eleanor said you're the best in the business, and after what happened with my last planner, long story, I really need someone I can trust. Would love to set up a consultation. Rachel." I smiled, typing back a response with my assistant's contact information and a link to my services page. Another referral from the Morrison family, another client who came to me through word-of-mouth reputation rather than family obligation. As I walked to my car, I thought about the version of myself who had planned my parents' anniversary celebration. That woman had been talented, dedicated, and generous to a fault. But she had also been invisible, taken for granted, and afraid to value her own work. The woman I was now still had all those positive qualities, but she also had something equally important: boundaries. The knowledge that her time and expertise were valuable. The confidence to demand respect instead of hoping for it. My parents had taught me an invaluable lesson, even if they hadn't meant to. They'd shown me what happened when you give everything to people who don't appreciate it. They'd demonstrated the difference between being needed and being valued. And in trying to take away my dignity, they'd actually given me something more precious: the motivation to demand better for myself. 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Wedding Planner magazine with the headline "The Boundary Boss: How One Planner's Personal Journey Changed Her Professional Life." The article detailed my transformation from family fixer to successful businesswoman, and it sparked a nationwide conversation about professional boundaries and family dynamics. The day the magazine hit newsstands, I received dozens of emails from other event planners sharing their own stories of family exploitation. I heard from women who'd planned countless family events for free, from professionals whose expertise was dismissed because it came from a relative, from daughters and sisters and nieces who'd been turned into unpaid labor coordinators for their family celebrations. Each story reinforced what I'd learned: this wasn't just my problem. It was a systemic issue that affected professional women everywhere, and speaking up about it had given others permission to examine their own relationships and boundaries. The most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. I was at home on a Saturday morning, reading through the latest batch of emails, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my father standing alone on my doorstep, holding what appeared to be a copy of the magazine. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I was wondering if we could talk." I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around my apartment, really looked at it, taking in the professional awards on the walls, the portfolio books on my coffee table, the evidence of a successful career built on my own terms. "I read your article," he said, sitting down on my couch and holding up the magazine. "What did you think?" He was quiet for a long moment, turning the magazine over in his hands. "I thought," he said finally, "that we failed you as parents." The words hung in the air between us. I'd imagined this conversation so many times, but I'd never expected it to start with such a direct acknowledgement. "We raised you to be responsible, to take care of others, to always put the family first," he continued. "And somewhere along the way, we forgot to teach you that your needs mattered too." "Dad." "Let me finish," he said gently. "Reading your article, seeing how articulate and successful you are, understanding the level of work you put into our anniversary, I realized we didn't just take advantage of your generosity. We taught you that your value was tied to what you could do for us." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I didn't interrupt. "Your mother and I have been talking a lot since the magazine came out. We've been thinking about all the times we called you to fix things, to handle arrangements, to manage family situations. We told ourselves we were asking because you were so good at it, because we trusted you to handle important things." "But that wasn't the whole truth," I said quietly. "No," he admitted. "The whole truth is that we were asking because it was easier than doing the work ourselves. Because we knew you wouldn't say no. Because we'd gotten used to having someone in the family who would always clean up our messes." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of this admission. "I'm proud of you," my father said suddenly. "For standing up for yourself. For building this incredible business. For refusing to let us take advantage of you anymore." "It wasn't easy," I said. "I'm sure it wasn't. Changing family dynamics never is. But you were brave enough to do it, and now look at what you've accomplished." He gestured to the magazine, to the evidence of my success scattered around the room. "This is what happens when someone gets to focus on their own dreams instead of managing everyone else's," he said. And we almost robbed you of this opportunity because we were too selfish to see what we were taking. I wiped my eyes, surprised by how much his words meant to me. Where do we go from here? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship, but I understand if you're not ready for that. And if you are ready, I want to do it the right way this time. What does that look like? It looks like treating you like the successful professional you are instead of like our personal problem solver, he said. It looks like respecting your boundaries and your time. It looks like being proud of your accomplishments instead of just benefiting from them. I studied my father's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But all I saw was genuine remorse and a desire to do better. I'd like that, I said carefully. But it has to be real change, Dad. Not just good intentions that fade when the next crisis comes up. I understand, he said. And I want you to know that your mother feels the same way. She's been afraid to call you because she doesn't want to make things worse, but she's incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. And Scarlett? My father smiled ruefully. Scarlett is learning some hard lessons about adult responsibility. Marriage has been educational for her. She's starting to understand what it means to manage a household and a relationship without someone else handling all the details. That's probably good for her. It is, he agreed. And part of that education has been realizing how much work you used to do for all of us without any recognition. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating the boundaries of our new relationship. My father didn't ask me to fix anything or plan anything or manage anything. He just talked to me like the adult daughter I was, interested in my work and my life without trying to extract anything from either. When he left, he hugged me at the door. I love you, Oriana, he said. Not because of what you can do for us, but because of who you are. It was the first time in my adult life that I believed him completely. Over the following months, my family relationships slowly began to heal. Not into the old pattern of me managing everyone else's needs, but into something healthier and more balanced. My mother started calling just to chat, not because she needed me to solve a problem. Scarlett sent me a thoughtful birthday card with a handwritten note apologizing for her behavior during the anniversary planning disaster. The most significant change came when my parents' 31st anniversary approached. Instead of expecting me to handle the arrangements, they made their own plans. A quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant followed by a weekend getaway they'd booked themselves. A week before their anniversary, my mother called to invite me to join them for dinner. We'd love to have you celebrate with us, she said, but no pressure if you have other plans. I accepted the invitation, curious to see how different it would feel to attend a family celebration that I hadn't organized. The dinner was lovely, relaxed, intimate, and completely stress-free for me. As we shared dessert, my mother raised her glass. I want to propose a toast, she said. To 31 years of marriage, to the lessons we've learned along the way, and to our daughter, who taught us that the people you love deserve respect as much as they deserve love. We clinked glasses, and I felt something I'd never experienced at a family gathering before. I felt like a guest instead of the staff. After dinner, as we were saying our goodbyes in the restaurant parking lot, my father pulled me aside. Thank you for coming, he said. It meant a lot to have you here. Thank you for inviting me, I replied. And for planning such a nice evening. He smiled. It wasn't as elaborate as what you would have done, but it felt right for us. Sometimes simple is perfect, I said, and I meant it. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years ago, I'd been a chronic people pleaser who measured my worth by how much I could do for others. Tonight, I'd been a beloved daughter celebrating with parents who respected my boundaries and valued my presence without expecting my labor. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been painless. But sitting in my car in my own driveway, looking up at my apartment where no one expected me to fix anything or solve any problems, I knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment had been worth it. I was no longer the family fixer. I was no longer the person who sacrificed her own needs to meet everyone else's expectations. I was no longer afraid to demand respect instead of hoping for it. I was Oriana Kelly, successful businesswoman, boundary setter, and woman who had learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. And for the first time in my adult life, that was enough.